Hola, bienvenidos. Estamos en esta oportunidad con Esther. Mi nombre es Gustavo Quiroz, soy Agile Coach and Trainer en Clear. Esther es una renombrada experta en Agile, específicamente en temas que tienen que ver con facilitación, retrospectivas, liderazgo y equipos. Ella es coautora de 2 libros, uno se llama Behind Closed Doors y otro se llama Agile Retrospectives. Vamos a conversar un poco con Esther. Estamos aquí en Agile 2014, Agile 2014 en Orlando, Florida. Ok, Esther, welcome. Buenos días.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for accepting the interview.
It's a pleasure.
Okay. Esther, how would you describe yourself for our audience?
Well, I started my career as a programmer, which some people don't know about me since I'm mostly associated with organizational dynamics and teams. But I actually did start as a programmer. And over the years, I wore many different hats. I was a team lead, I did some testing, as all programmers did their own testing. I was a project manager and an internal consultant. And over the years, from all of those positions, what was clear to me was that the work environment had a huge influence on our ability to be successful. So no matter how smart we were, if we were in an environment that didn't allow us to work well, we wouldn't produce good results. So I shifted my interests in my work to looking more at the dynamics of the environment.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So, I'm guessing around that time, but how did you begin with Agile specifically? How did you come up with Agile, or come in contact with the Agile world?
Well, I heard stories and little hints about it from people I knew, and I was attracted to it because it specifically addressed valuing people, and it specifically addressed valuing working in teams and putting an emphasis on collaboration and delivering to the customers and interacting with the customers. Because my experience over the years was that the projects I had been on that worked best worked in a way that was very similar to that. So when I first started programming, we worked in little tiny teams and we were in contact with the customer every single day and we'd show them stuff as we were going. And then over the years, these big methodologies took over and we had to do all the requirements up front and we never got to talk to the users, we just had to read these documents and wait. So I always tried to work in as agile a way as I could, given the organization I was in. So that's really what attracted me.
Around what time was this? In what year?
Well, I don't remember years anymore, so no, I don't.
Like before the manifesto, after the manifesto?
After. Yeah, it was after. Yeah.
Like right after, maybe?
Well, soon after, certainly.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
And how do you see Agile throughout the years? From when it first began and now, what changes have you seen throughout those years?
Well, I was actually chatting with Ron Jeffries about this yesterday, which is, and in some ways this was the subject of my talk, is when Agile practices first became recognized or talked about as that. It was a set of practices that people had worked on and they learned and they tried this and they found something that worked. And that really was the spirit of Agile in the beginning, was, use solid practices, use the principles, and find what has worked for you, because everyone's a snowflake, right?
Yeah.
And over the years, I have seen it become more, this is the one way, and you must do it. This is the true way.
The one true way.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I've also seen people who say the words, but because the practices have become divorced from the principles, they apply the practices in a way that, in some ways, exactly fits their current culture. So I don't know how long you've been programming, but when I first started programming, we were doing procedural languages like assembler and so forth, and when object-oriented languages came about, it was a big mental shift. And the first object-oriented program that I wrote was really very procedural.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think that's what happens. You know, people have this mindset of the legacy of command and control, and the legacy of waterfall, and the legacy of hierarchical working, and very, very narrow functional divisions. And so they say the words of Agile, but it's kind of like that program I wrote. That in some ways, even though they're using an Agile language, their actual way of working often looks indistinguishable from what they were doing before. And this doesn't make them bad people. This is just what happens, right? This is a normal human thing to have happen, and that's why I emphasize the principles so much in my talk on Monday.
You did a session on Monday called Still No Silver Bullets.
Yes.
And I like the talk very much.
Thank you.
I was a volunteer in that session.
Yes, and you were very helpful.
Oh, thank you very much. And I love how you talked about the snowflake concept, which maybe you can clarify to our...
Sure. It's on one level, we think that all organizations are like, right? And that we should be able to find best practices that will work everywhere, in every context, in every company. But in reality, organizations are like snowflakes, and that each one is unique. They may have the same molecules, but the structure in a complex snowflake, each one is completely unique, and within each organization, each team is unique. So we need to really look at the context that we're working in, and the customers, the market, the values, the skills of the people who are there, and being very mindful of the principles, adapt both our environment and the practices so that we're continually learning and doing something that's a perfect fit for
I love that framework, if you might call it, of performance equals practices plus principles plus environment, something like that?
Yeah.
Could you explain a little bit about the
well, many, many years ago, an organizational psychologist named Kurt, I think that's what he would call himself. He might give himself a different title. Anyway, he was a brilliant thinker about organizations. Came up with this little formula that said, performance is a function of the people and the environment, which I believe is true. And I have expanded on that to say, performance is a function of the practices, the principles, and the environment. Right? So you need to be considering the principles that underlie the practices themselves, and the environment in order to have something effective.
Can you give us an example of that? How you see it in the company?
Not off the top of my head.
Maybe doing it wrong. Not a real company, but how companies approach change, not considering those three aspects.
Well, okay, so rephrasing that question was very helpful. So what I often see is people that will say, we want our teams to be collaborative, we want them to work together. But yet people are evaluated as individuals. They have a job description that says you must do these things but not these things. You have an individual reporting relationship with your manager who tells you what to do, all of which work against collaborating. So they're saying the words, but they're missing some of the principles behind the practice of collaboration. Did that help?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
What have you been working on lately? Stuff related to this concept? Other stuff maybe that has been interesting to you lately?
Well, I've been working on my garden a lot.
On your garden? Nice.
Yeah, we have my husband, who's actually the main gardener. He has a really extensive vegetable garden, so I get to work on cooking, stuff that comes out of the garden. That's probably not what you were asking about, though.
Maybe in an organizational context.
Yeah. Well, I mean, growing a garden is in some ways not a bad metaphor for what we do. So I have been working on languaging how you can talk to people who are very used to a traditional directive management style and help them feel comfortable that teams can self-organize and teams can have bounded autonomy, and the world won't just fly apart. So that's one of the things I'm most interested in right now, is helping people make that transition from a traditional top-down management style that is based on lack of trust, to setting the constraints so that people can be free to work creatively to solve the problems that are facing the organization.
So it's basically a mindset shift in people that
and broadening the definition of leadership.
Okay. And what advice would you give to people trying to do that with their managers, trying to be a change agent and working with those issues?
Well, I think an important thing is to not tell people that they've been stupid, bad, and wrong. Because people then, they feel threatened. And when people feel threatened, they don't want to hear what you have to say. So I think it's important to value what has been useful about the way they've been doing things. Value them as humans. Acknowledge that this is their identity and you're asking them to change it, right? Which isn't so easy.
Yes.
It's not so easy. And learn how to frame things in, as I alluded to earlier, in the language that they can hear, so that they can actually start to hang the concepts onto their existing cognitive frameworks. So talk about the things they care about, which are often, delivering value or bottom line issues, or having a sense of, I know what's going on in this group, I can know what the status is. So try to frame it in ways that talks to things that they care about, respects their current identity, and helps them begin to hang these new concepts onto their existing frameworks.
And do you see success in helping these old school managers migrate to a new leadership
sometimes.
style?
Sometimes. I mean, I've talked to people who said, it's such a relief.
Okay.
It's such a relief. I don't have to do everything myself anymore.
That's nice.
I can, I have a better relationship or trust with the team because we all know what the boundaries are, and they know that these are their decisions to make. But if we step over here, then we need to make a decision together. But because we're clear about that, I can feel more trust, and they can feel more trust, and we can act more like partners.
Okay.
So I have had that. I have heard that from folks, and it's really very, very gratifying. My friend Susan DeFabio is doing a talk, I think today, called Essential Conversations, that tells her story about how she used a structured process to help that happen for some managers. And one of her stories is there was a boss in her company who was known as the Dragon Lady.
The Dragon Lady.
The Dragon Lady, and everybody was scared of her.
Yeah.
And she went through this process of having more open conversations and moving into partnership with the people who reported to her. And now some of them think that she's the best boss they ever had.
Oh, that's good.
So it is possible. It's very possible. But people need to be supported and valued.
Sure. And looking at the bigger picture, what do you see in terms of, we're applying Agile, in terms of applying, I don't know how to call it, good Agile, based on principles and environment and all that stuff. Where is this leading us to? I mean, do you see like Agile being part of a larger thing in business, human development maybe?
Well, I hope that at some point Agile is just the way we work.
Okay.
That it's just the way we work. We work in small increments, we're close to our customers, we're focusing on value, we're valuing people, and creating environments where they can do really great work. So I hope that it just becomes the way we do software development. And I think that's going to entail some changes in many of the organizational entities around software development. Because most of our human resource functions and finance and so forth have been working very well within a particular model of the world. If we want to shift to a different one, then there needs to be some shifts there too. The Beyond Budgeting folks have some really great ideas about how to distribute decision-making throughout organizations, which I think is very useful because they can talk the language of finance.
Yeah.
Right? And so I think the work they're doing is going to be very valuable. And I'm also seeing some work come out, and I'm doing some of the work about human resources, which I really don't like that term.
The name is not good.
The name is terrible. Personnel, they used to call it, which I actually think is more humane.
Or talent resources.
Yeah.
People stuff.
People stuff. So looking at different ways to think about jobs, rather than all of these little tiny boxes of job descriptions, and thinking about ways to help people self-organize and to have the staff groups support people and teach them rather than to be the ones to solve problems and to be the people who provide to do it. So I see movement, and I would like to see the software folks who are working this way hook up more with the other areas that are exploring these, like beyond budgeting is one of them. Some of the work that's being done with Margaret Wheatley and some other folks looking at the power of self-organization. I would like to see more synergy across that, because I think we all have a piece of it, and that if we are able to work more closely, that we will get further faster. But there's an old saying about that, isn't there? It actually says if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. But I think in this case, we need to work with those other groups to both go far and go fast.
You mentioned beyond budgeting.
Yep.
What other groups or trends do you see that go with an agile mindset, maybe, would align in this?
Yeah, well, I think Margaret Wheatley's work is really aligned with the work we're doing. Leadership in the New Science, and some of her work on teams, I think is very, very important. She tells a very interesting story about the self-organizing teams are at a minimum of 35% more productive than traditionally managed teams. At a minimum, wow. Right? At a minimum. And she refers to a story about the Welsh coal mines where in the 40s, where the conditions were so bad that the managers wouldn't go into the mines anymore.
Wow. The health conditions.
Like the safety conditions were so
oxygen
bad. Yes, yeah, and rocks falling, all sorts of things. And so the managers wouldn't go into the mines anymore, and productivity went up dramatically.
Because the managers wouldn't.
Because the teams were self-organizing. Yes. So I think her work is very compatible with the work we're doing here. And there are a number of other organizations doing interesting things that, I think there are some people involved around the peripheries in making those connections.
And so we have like these pockets of stuff going around. What would happen if we all join and got together? What do you see like in 10, 20 years if all these different movements gather around and do stuff together?
Well, I think we could think of different ways of having companies that were more humane and more productive. Yeah. And that's what I really care about. I want people to go to work and feel like it's a source of fulfillment, not something they're just doing as they come to their days to retirement. Something that I have to do to have my real life. Because it is, we spend a huge amount of time at work. Yeah. And so I think we should treat it like our real life. And I think the reason people don't is because they're often putting up with conditions that they would never tolerate if it were real life. So
you're optimistic about that?
I am. And one of the reasons I'm optimistic is the millennial generation.
Yeah.
I mean, I often hear very negative things said about millennials that, they want all this autonomy, they want freedom, they want feedback, they want a responsibility before they put in their time.
Yeah.
I think those are all good things.
Yeah, sure.
And I think that some of our older organizations are at a certain point going to realize if we don't design ourselves to allow that, we're not going to get the best people anymore. We're only going to get the people who don't want to think and don't want to take responsibility and don't want to hear, how can I do better continuously. So I think that's another reason to be optimistic. We have a whole generation of people coming into the workforce who have different expectations about the sorts of work they want to do, the sorts of life they want to have, and what they'll put up with. So I'm hopeful.
So maybe in 10, 20 years we will have a very different very different companies and a different world maybe.
Well, I hope within my lifetime. Yeah, I hope so.
Okay. So anything else you want to tell us, discuss, or maybe before we wrap up?
Well, I hope you guys have a wonderful conference. I wish I could be there. I hear really, really exciting things about what you guys are doing in Latin America. And so it's just delightful to spend a little time with you.
Great. We are thrilled to have you here. We're very thankful, and we'll see you around next time.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you.
Bye bye. Ciao. Nos vemos.